19 COVID Stories. Taking a Risk. June 2020. A strange hush hung over the school. The shutdown caused by the outbreak of the virus had been partially lifted to enable the senior pupils to take their middle school certificate examinations. Today was the last one, English. Disinfected tables and chairs had been set up in accordance with the measured regulations. The final year pupils were seated and waiting in the assembly hall. Further down the deserted corridor, in the middle of an empty classroom, Leonie sat at her own isolated disinfected desk. Neatly set out in front of her were pen, inhaler and phone, switched off and ready to be handed in. Asthma had pushed Leonie into the so-called high-risk group, pupils with health issues that made them more vulnerable to the effects of the COVID-19 virus and were therefore denied any contact with classmates. Before each exam, Leonie was marched through the school building to her single desk, standing alone in her former classroom. On finishing, she was marched out again, her mum collecting her in the family car. Public transport being quite out of the question. Leonie looked at the clock on the wall, but her warm breath, blown up from under the medical mask she was wearing, had steamed up her glasses. After wiping and slipping them back on, she glanced again to check the time. 8:05 a.m. Mrs. Schmidt, who was supposed to be adjudicating the exam, was late. Leonie considered going to search for the teacher, but after the drama this had caused before the maths exam, Mrs. Koch catching her in the corridor and accusing her shrilly of not only being a risk to herself, but a death threat to anyone over the age of 70, she thought it better to sit and wait. The sudden opening of the classroom door startled her. She turned to see the gorgeous figure of Sandro Gelato stroll into the room, and everything went into slow motion. All the girls in Leonie's class fancied Sandro, even the girls already going out with other boys. None of them, however, had ever kissed him. Chantal Bruggemann claimed she had, but Leonie didn't believe her because Chantal Bruggemann was a lying slag. Sandro was standing by the adjudicator's desk, exam paper in hand, smiling at her from behind his mask. Not standard shapeless blue-green medical mask Leonie wore, but a piece of black silk cloth pulled tight over his nose and mouth, perfectly matching his black Adidas sports top. "Hiya." Leonie, blushing furiously, returned the greeting. "Hiya." Sandro casually surveyed the desolate classroom before fixing his dark brown eyes back on Leonie. "Must be a bit weird in here. All on your own?" In an attempt to beat down the butterflies flapping about wildly inside her, Leonie countered with a bossy tone. "You're not allowed to be in here. No one is." To underline her point, she picked up her inhaler and, tucking it under her mask, pressed the thick button and inhaled fiercely. Deep in her chest, she felt the delicious relief that the inhaler always gave her. The butterflies settled down. "Mrs. Schmidt says the exam's been delayed for 15 minutes, and you're to wait in here till she comes." Her hot flush cooled. Leonie held his gaze, lifting one eyebrow flirtatiously. "Don't worry. I'm not going anywhere." This seemed to slightly unsettle Sandro, who now gestured vaguely with the writing paper in his hand. "Yeah, well, she said I had to leave this here. Extra writing paper. To make notes, if you want." The inhaler was certainly working its magic. Leonie was almost light-headed. "Well, go on then." Sandro frowned, two small cracks running up his dark, smooth forehead. "What?" She was gaining the upper hand. "Bring the exam paper over here." The boy walked hesitantly towards her, the writing paper held out in front of him. Leonie knew that this was her last chance. After the exam, school would be over. For this year's graduates, there would be no post-exam period of fun and games, no graduate party and all the possibilities it offered. The only thing waiting for Leonie was a summer spent with her parents at home, listening to her dad banging on about the government and the virus, and no chance, absolutely no chance of a summer romance, of secret meetings down by the lake, of feeling cool, wet skin drying next to hers under a warm sun. Here it is. Sandro tentatively placed the writing paper on the desk. Leonie stood up slowly. "Do you want to kiss me?" It was Sandro now who was blushing. "Are you mad? What do you think we're wearing these things for?" He gestured to the mask on his face. "To stop me getting pregnant?" They both laughed. A pause followed. The moment was slipping away. Leonie tried to rescue it. "Well then?" Sandro was wavering. "Isn't it a bit risky?" Leonie didn't answer. Instead, she lifted her hand to the side of his head, her fingers slowly pulling the black silken material free, peeling it from Sandro's face, revealing the olive skin, the high cheekbone, the full lips. After a tentative pause, Sandro raised his own hand, and Leonie felt his fingers touch her ear, and with a gentleness that surprised her, unfastened the strap of her own mask, pulling it away to reveal the nakedness of her face. The two leant towards each other, their lips cushioning delicately, before their tongues met in the warm, shared space of their open mouths. A sudden clatter of high heels scuttling down the corridor jerked Sandro and Leonie apart as if electrocuted. Both hurriedly replaced their masks. Before Leonie could sit and Sandro could go back to the adjudicator's desk, Mrs. Schmidt was in the room. "What do you think you're doing?" Years of school had taught Sandro the art of quick-fire lying. "I'm giving her writing paper, miss." "No, you're not. You're standing around chatting together. Leonie is a high-risk pupil. Don't you understand anything?" "No, miss." The fact Mrs. Schmidt had been married for over 20 years made no difference. All the pupils in the school still called her miss, the idea of a Mr. Schmidt being simply unimaginable. "Well, she's got her writing paper now, so you can go back to your own desk in the assembly hall." Mrs. Schmidt turned and, leaning over the adjudicator's table, busied herself sorting papers. As Sandro left the room, he winked at Leonie before closing the door behind him. Still heady with euphoria, Leonie closed her eyes and took deep breaths, just as Dr. Meyer had shown her. Gradually, the double rhythm pounding in her chest, a bare-knuckle fistfight between danger and desire, beat itself out. She opened her eyes, picked up her pen, and turned over the exam paper. Middle School Certificate. School Year 2019-2020. English Literature, Paper 1. Romeo and Juliet were not star-crossed lovers, but the tragic story of two young people who flirted with death. Discuss.